There is a kind of silence that belongs only to New York City, not the silence of empty fields or sleeping towns, not the peaceful kind. This is the silence of 8 million people choosing all at once not to look at something. It is the silence of shoes clicking past on pavement, of eyes trained carefully forward, of a city that has learned through long practice that the fastest way to get through a day is to see only what is necessary. Elena Mercer had lived inside that silence for 3 years. She had arrived in New York at 23 with a degree in art history, a suitcase held together by a broken zipper and a bungee cord, and a quiet, stubborn belief that the city would eventually make room for her. It had not made room for her. It had done what New York does to most people. It had simply proceeded at its normal pace, vast and indifferent, and left her to figure out how to keep up. She waited tables at a cafe called Ariston, 1 block west of Columbus Circle, Tuesday through Sunday. The shifts started at 6 in the morning and ended whenever the last customer decided to leave. She wore a black apron and a ponytail, and she had learned to carry 4 plates on each arm without thinking about it. She had learned to smile at men who snapped their fingers at her. She had learned to make the complicated coffee drinks that required 3 separate temperatures and a design in the foam. She had learned, most importantly, how to be invisible, how to move through a crowded room and be neither seen nor heard, just efficient, just present enough to do the job. On Tuesday mornings, before her shift began, she took a different route to work. She walked through Central Park from the 72nd Street entrance down to Columbus Circle rather than taking the subway. It cost her 20 minutes she didn't technically have. She did it anyway. The park was the one place in the city where she could breathe without calculating what it cost. She had discovered in those Tuesday morning walks something her art history professors had tried to teach her and failed. That beauty doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a frame around it and a placard on the wall. It arrives in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday when the light hits the surface of the reservoir at a particular angle, when the bare trees in November look like ink drawings against a white sky. It arrives when you're not looking for it, which means you have to be the kind of person who keeps looking anyway. Elena had kept looking, even when the student loan notices stacked up on her kitchen table, even when she had done the math 3 times from 3 different angles, and the math kept coming out the same wrong way. $62,000. That was the number. That was the weight of her education measured in monthly minimums she could barely meet, and interest that accumulated like weather, slow and relentless, and entirely indifferent to her circumstances. She did not paint anymore. She had stopped 8 months ago, not because she wanted to, but because the supplies cost money and the time cost more. She kept her brushes in a coffee can on the windowsill of her apartment in Queens. She looked at them sometimes. That was as far as it went. On the morning of November 3rd, she walked through the park the same way she always did. Same entrance, same path along the east side of the reservoir, same turn south toward the Bethesda fountain. The sky was the color of old pewter flat and close, carrying the cold that arrives in New York in early November and stays for 5 months. She had her coat buttoned to the collar. She had coffee in a paper cup that had already gone lukewarm. She heard him before she saw him. A sound thin and high and very tired, like something that had been going on for a while without anyone paying attention. She slowed. The path ahead was busy joggers, a nanny with a stroller, a man walking 2 large dogs, everyone moving in the purposeful forward-facing way of people with places to be. And in the middle of all of it, on a bench just off the path, a small boy was crying. "Aoi." He was 5 years old, perhaps, small for his age, dark-haired, dressed in a way that was striking for its formality. A navy jacket with actual buttons, dark trousers pressed into a crease, small leather shoes that had been polished recently and were now scuffed where he had been kicking his heels against the base of the bench. He sat rigidly upright the way children do when they are trying very hard to be brave and failing completely. His hands were folded in his lap. Tears ran down his face, and he was not wiping them away. The people passing him were not cruel. They were just busy. Some glanced over. One woman slowed her pace briefly, looked at him, looked around as if checking for a parent, and then kept walking. 2 joggers passed without looking at all. A man stopped, checked his watch, looked at the boy, then looked at his watch again, and left. Elena stopped. She stood there for a moment with her lukewarm coffee and watched him. She looked around the same way the woman before her had looked around, checking for a parent, a nanny, anyone responsible for this child. She saw no one. She walked over and crouched down in front of him. He looked at her. His eyes were the deep brown that appears almost black in low light. There was intelligence in them and wariness, and underneath both of those things, a fear so complete and so carefully controlled that it made her chest hurt. "Hey," she said, "are you lost?" He stared at her. He did not answer. She tried again, simpler. "What's your name?" "Nothing." He blinked. More tears moved down his face. She tried Spanish. She had learned enough of it in 3 years of cafe work to manage the basics. "¿Cómo te llamas? ¿Dónde está tu mamá?" He shook his head slowly, a small, precise motion that meant he understood the question and wasn't answering it. She sat down on the bench beside him, not too close. She set her coffee on the ground and laced her hands together, elbows on her knees, and looked out at the path for a moment. Not at him, just present, just there. Then she tried the last language she had. It was not a practical decision. It was barely a conscious one. She had studied Italian during a semester abroad in Florence when she was 21 and then kept studying afterward in evening classes because she had loved it, loved the sound of it, the way it moved in the mouth, the way it seemed to carry the weight of centuries in even simple words. She had no particular use for it in New York. She had kept it anyway, the way people keep things they love, even when they serve no obvious purpose. She said quietly into the November air, "Non piangere piccolo, sono qui, come ti chiami?" "Don't cry, little one, I'm here, what's your name?" The boy went completely still. Not the stillness of confusion, not the stillness of a child who doesn't understand. It was the stillness of something inside him that had just heard, after a long silence, a sound it recognized. His entire body changed. The rigid posture softened. His hands unfolded in his lap. He turned and looked at her with those dark brown eyes, and what she saw in them now was not just wariness. It was recognition. "Nico," he whispered. She felt something loosen in her chest. "Nico," she repeated. "Che bel nome." What a beautiful name. "Io mi chiamo Elena. Dove è il tuo papà, Nico?" "Where is your papa?" And then Nico began to talk. He talked the way children talk when they have been holding something in, quickly words tumbling over each other, small hands moving in illustration. He told her about his father. He told her they had been walking. He told her about the dog, a big brown dog with a stick in its mouth that he had followed because he wanted to pet it, and then he had turned around and his father wasn't there. He told her he had been sitting on the bench for a long time and nobody had stopped. He said the last part without accusation, just as a fact. Nobody had stopped. Elena listened to all of it. She asked simple, careful questions in Italian, and he answered them. She told him his father was probably looking for him right now, that everything was going to be fine, that he had done exactly the right thing by staying in one place. She said it all in Italian, keeping her voice low and even, and the boy nodded along with her words, like they were something he had been waiting to hear. She did not notice at first the 3 men. They appeared at the edge of the path in the way that well-trained security always appears, not suddenly, but already there, as if they had been present for some time, and you simply hadn't registered them. They were large. They wore dark suits that were expensive and unremarkable. They moved through the light crowd with a precision that was not threatening and not rushing, but was absolutely certain of its destination. One of them, the one in front, slightly taller than the other two, with a jaw that looked like it had been cut from stone and eyes the color of river water, in winter spoke quietly into an earpiece and then looked directly at Elena and the boy. Nico turned at that moment. He saw the man. His entire face changed. "Enzo," he said, and stood up from the bench so fast that Elena reached out instinctively to steady him. The man called Enzo crossed the remaining distance quickly. He crouched down in front of Nico with a speed and gentleness that seemed slightly at odds with his size and the quality of his suit, and ran his hands over the boy's shoulders and arms in a quick, practiced check. He spoke to Nico in rapid Italian, low and urgent. Nico answered him, pointing back at Elena. Then Enzo looked up at her. He took her in with a glance that she suspected covered a great deal of ground. "You found him," he said. His English carried an Italian accent underneath it, clear and direct. "He was on the bench," Elena said. "He'd been there a while." "How long were you with him?" She thought about it. "Maybe 20 minutes. Enzo nodded. "You speak Italian." "Some," she said. Before he could respond, she became aware of a change in the immediate atmosphere. The joggers flowing past had begun giving the bench a wider berth, as if by collective instinct. The two other men in dark suits had repositioned themselves without appearing to move, and the space around the bench had taken on the quality of a perimeter. And then a fourth man arrived. He did not approach. He arrived, and there is a difference that lives entirely in what a person carries with them. He was tall. He moved through the corridor the other men had unconsciously created with a stride that made the park seem smaller, not because of aggression, but because of something harder to name. Gravity, perhaps. The sense that the space around him organized itself differently than it did for other people. He wore a dark overcoat collar up against the cold. Dark hair swept back from a face built on sharp angles, a strong jaw, a straight nose, cheekbones that would have looked aristocratic on a statue. His skin was olive, the kind that holds light differently from pale skin, and his eyes, nearly black, were fixed on the bench with an intensity that made everything else in his expression secondary. He was 42 years old, though he looked like a man who had lived considerably more than 42 years. He looked at Nico first, always at Nico first, and his face, which had been utterly controlled, a mask so complete it barely registered as a mask, cracked. He crossed to his son in 3 steps and gathered him up, and for a moment he held the boy against his chest. With his eyes closed, one hand spread across the back of Nico's small head. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The expression on his face said everything that words were inadequate for. Then he set Nico down and looked at Elena. She had the strange experience of being read rather than simply seen. His gaze moved over her face with the focused attention of someone accustomed to needing information quickly and needing it to be accurate. "You were with him," he said. "Yes." "You speak Italian." He needed someone to talk to. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, more like the slight displacement of weather when something underneath it changes. "My name is Matteo Conti," he said. He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was controlled, his hand larger than hers, the skin of his palm rougher than she had expected from a man who wore that quality of overcoat. "Elena Mercer." He held her gaze for 2 seconds longer, then was strictly conversational. Then he looked at Nico, who was standing beside him, Elena's hand still loosely in his. "Di grazie alla signora," Matteo said to his son. "Say thank you to the lady." Nico looked up at Elena with complete seriousness. "Grazie, Elena," he said. And then, without warning, he stepped forward and hugged her legs with both arms. She looked up from the top of the boy's head and found Matteo Conti watching this with an expression she could not fully interpret. Something in it looked like a man seeing something he had stopped expecting to see. She had no way of knowing, standing there in November light in Central Park, what that expression meant. She had no way of knowing that the last time anyone outside the immediate family had received a voluntary embrace from his son had been 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days ago. She had no way of knowing what those 2 years had cost. She didn't know any of it. She gently patted the boy's back and said in Italian that she was very glad to have met him. She was late for her shift. She said goodbye, untangled herself with care, and walked south through the park toward Columbus Circle with the cold air on her face and the feeling of being watched until she was too far away for it to matter. She thought about the boy for the rest of her shift, about the controlled grief of a child who had learned not to expect help, about the way he had talked once she gave him the language to do it, about his father's face when he held him. She didn't think about the 3 men in suits or the way they had organized the space around the bench or what that implied. She should have thought about that. She didn't. By the time her shift ended at 6, she had mostly set the whole encounter aside, the way you set aside things that are beautiful and temporary and don't belong to your ordinary life. She found out she was wrong about the temporary part at 11:15 that night. She was at her kitchen table in Woodside, Queens, with the student loan statement and her laptop doing the math again, because she could not stop doing the math when she heard the engine. She looked out her window. Below on the street, parked in a line with the precision of a military exercise, were 3 black SUVs with tinted windows. Engines off, lights off, just present. She stood very still at her window for a moment. Then her phone buzzed. The number was one she didn't recognize, a 212 area code Manhattan. The text was short. "Do not be afraid. The vehicles are for your protection, not a threat. I apologize for the alarm. MC." She read it twice. Then she sat down on her kitchen floor, which was not a thing she had ever done before, and thought carefully about her next decision. She called Bridget. Bridget Harlow had been Elena's closest friend since their freshman year of college, which meant she had also been Elena's emergency contact, her most reliable reality check. and the person she called at 11 at night when black SUVs materialized outside her window. Bridget worked in risk management for a mid-size insurance company in Midtown, which meant she had an extremely practical relationship with worst-case scenarios. "Start from the beginning," Bridget said after Elena had given her the 30-second version. Elena started from the beginning. When she finished, Bridget was quiet for 4 full seconds. "Okay," she said. "Google him. Right now, while I'm on the phone." Elena typed Matteo Conti, New York, into her laptop. The results loaded. She read them in silence. Bridget listened to the silence. "How bad is it?" Bridget asked. Elena read a little further, then a little further than that. "He's the head of one of the oldest organized crime families in New York," she said. "The Conti family, active since the 1940s. Federal investigations RICO charges that were dropped alleged connections to extortion and racketeering and protection operations across 3 boroughs." She paused. "He's never been convicted of anything." "Because people like that never are," Bridget said. "Elena, those aren't SUVs from a Grateful Father. Those are mob cars." "I know. You need to call the police and tell them what a man I don't know sent me a text saying his cars outside my building are for my protection. They'll think I'm paranoid." Bridget's voice was careful, precise. "Elena, you helped his kid. That's all you did. Send back a polite text saying thank you, you're fine, good night. Block the number. Never go back to that park." Elena looked at her laptop screen. She had landed on a photograph, a long lens shot, taken at what appeared to be a legal proceeding, Matteo Conti on a courthouse step in a dark suit flanked by attorneys. His expression in the photograph was the same one she had seen when he looked at her in the park, reading, processing, giving nothing back. But she had also seen the other expression, the one that was not for attorneys or courthouses, the one that was for a 5-year-old boy with dark eyes and leather shoes and 2 years of silence that had just somehow for 20 minutes come undone. "I'll be careful," she told Bridget. "That is not what I said to do." "I know. I'll be careful." She slept badly. When she checked the window at 2 in the morning, then again at 4, the SUVs were still there. By 5:30, they were gone, and the street looked exactly as it always looked, and she might have convinced herself she had dreamed the whole thing, except for the text still sitting in her phone. At 9 the next morning, a second text arrived. "I would like to speak with you. My office today, 11 o'clock. My driver will come to your building at 10:30. Please come. MC." She read it standing in her kitchen with her first coffee of the morning. Then a third text came before she had decided anything. "I understand this is unusual, and I understand why you would decline, but I am asking you to come. My son has not spoken to anyone outside our family in 2 years. Yesterday he spoke to you for 20 minutes. I would like to discuss what that means." She put her phone face down on the counter and drank her coffee. Then she texted back, "I'll be ready at 10:30. She sent Bridget a text that said only, "Going to meet him. Tracking is on. Call you at noon." She could already picture Bridget's expression. She sent it anyway. The driver arrived at exactly 10:30. He was a compact, quiet man who introduced himself as Daniel, held the door of the black SUV open with practiced efficiency, and said nothing beyond necessary for the entire 40-minute drive to Midtown. The SUV was cleaner than Elena's apartment and smelled faintly of leather and cedar. She sat in the back with her hands folded and watched New York pass outside the tinted window and thought about what she was doing. She was doing something inadvisable. She had made her peace with that. The building was in Midtown, 1 block from Park Avenue, the kind of building that announces wealth through understatement rather than excess. Dark granite facade, a doorman who did not appear surprised to see her, a lobby with a floor of pale marble and no chairs. Nobody sits in this lobby. People pass through it to get somewhere more important. Daniel walked her to an elevator that required a keycard and pressed a button for the top floor. The elevator opened into an anteroom and then through a frosted glass door into an office that occupied the entire south end of the floor. The windows ran floor to ceiling on 2 sides. From where she stood, Elena could see Central Park, the whole of it, north to south, the reservoir catching the November sky, the bare trees arranged against the city, like a painting she had studied once but couldn't immediately name. It was the most complete view of the park she had ever seen. Standing in front of those windows, with the park behind him, was Matteo Conti. He was in a charcoal suit today. No overcoat. He wore it the way men wear things when they are so accustomed to quality that quality has become invisible to them. He was speaking to someone on his phone in Italian, fast and low, and he held up one finger to her, a precise, brief signal, then finished the call in 30 seconds and put the phone away. "Miss Mercer," he said, "thank you for coming." "I almost didn't." "I know." He gestured toward a seating area, a leather sofa, 2 chairs, a low table. "Please sit." She sat. He remained standing for a moment looking at her with that reading quality in his gaze. Then he said, "What would you like, coffee, water?" "Answers," she said. "I'd like answers." He sat down across from her. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and when he looked at her from that position, the dangerous quality of him was very apparent, not because he was threatening anything, but because it was impossible to pretend it wasn't there. "My son," he said, "has not spoken to anyone outside our family since his mother died 2 years ago. Tutors, therapists, children's specialists from 3 different hospitals. He answers questions with 1 word, if he answers at all. He has not laughed. He has not in 2 years voluntarily touched a person who was not me or our housekeeper or his grandfather." He paused. "Yesterday, he spoke to you for 20 minutes. He told you about the dog. He told you about the park. He told you his name." He held her gaze steadily. "He hugged you." Elena said nothing. "Do you understand what that is?" Matteo asked. "Do you understand what I watched from a security feed on a bench in Central Park?" "I just spoke to him in Italian," Elena said carefully. His mother was Italian. It connected him to something familiar. "Yes," Matteo said. "It did, which is why I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear it completely before you respond." He stood and walked to a desk at the far end of the room. He returned with a document several pages paper-clipped and placed it on the table between them. "I want to offer you a position," he said, "as Nico's tutor. Language instruction, Italian and English cultural education, general companionship. 4 afternoons per week at my home. The contract is straightforward, reviewed by my attorneys, entirely legal, no obligations outside the stated scope." He sat back down. $25,000 per month. The number landed in the room between them. Elena looked at the contract. She looked at it for a long moment without touching it. $25,000 per month. She did the math the way she always did the math. 12 months, student loans eliminated in just over 2 years, enough saved in 6 months to have options she had not had in 3 years, enough eventually to paint again, to stop carrying 4 plates on each arm, to stop smiling at men who snapped their fingers. She looked up at him. "You're asking me to come into your home, to be around your son, knowing what I know about who you are." "Yes, that's not a small thing." "No," he agreed. "It is not." "What are you hoping happens?" she asked. "Specifically." He considered the question as if it deserved consideration. "I want my son to speak," he said. "I want him to laugh. I want him to be a child instead of a small person who is managing a grief that is too large for him." He looked at the window at the park visible beyond it. He loved his mother. She was Italian from Genoa. He grew up hearing Italian the way you hear music as the language of safety, of comfort, of love. When she died, he stopped hearing it. He looked back at Elena. "You gave it back to him for 20 minutes on a park bench. I am asking you to keep doing that." Elena reached forward and picked up the contract. She read it, all of it, slowly and carefully. It was what he had said it was. Clear scope of employment, legal terms, an exit clause that was straightforward. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me." "First, I teach Nico. That's it. I'm not involved in your business. I don't see anything I don't need to see. I don't know anything I don't need to know. I am a tutor, nothing more." "Agreed." "Second, Nico is the priority, always. If at any point this arrangement affects him negatively, I end it. No argument." "Agreed." "Third," she set the contract down, "I keep my own life, my apartment, my schedule outside of our contracted hours, my independence. I'm not becoming part of your household." He held her gaze. "Agreed," he said. "But I should tell you something in return before you sign." "Tell me." "From the moment Nico spoke to you in that park," he said evenly, "you became a person of interest to certain people, people who are not interested in you for good reasons. The vehicles outside your building last night were not a gesture. They were a necessity." He let that land. Whether you take this position or not, I will continue to ensure your safety, not as an obligation you owe me, as a consequence of a thing that happened yesterday that neither of us chose." She looked at him. "Are you saying I don't have a real choice?" "I'm saying the choice you have is between taking a position that pays well, working with a child who needs you, and living with appropriate security, or not taking the position returning to your normal life and still having the security whether you want it or not." He was very still. "I would prefer to be honest with you about that." Elena thought about the boy on the bench, about the specific quality of his stillness, about the way he had talked about the dog and the way he had said her name, Elena, with the precise Italian pronunciation, the middle syllable lengthened, as if the word itself was worth taking care with. She picked up the pen that was resting beside the contract. She signed. The townhouse on the Upper East Side was not what she had pictured. She had pictured something that announced itself, something that would confirm the image of the man in the photographs, the courthouse steps, the dark suit, the attorneys. She had pictured marble and iron gates and the visible architecture of power. What she found instead was a brownstone on a quiet block 3 stories with window boxes on the second floor that still held the dried stalks of summer flowers. It looked like a family home. It looked like a place where someone had been happy. Enzo Ferrara met her at the door. She recognized him immediately, the height, the jaw, the steady gray eyes. He gave her a nod that carried something more than professional courtesy, something that looked, if she read it correctly, like approval. "Miss Mercer," he said. "Welcome." Inside the door, Florinda appeared. She was 62 years old and had been managing the Conti household for 11 years, and she had in that time developed an expression that communicated warmth and intelligence and a total absence of nonsense in approximately equal measure. She had gray hair pulled back, simply a dark cardigan, and she took both of Elena's hands in both of hers before Elena had fully stepped through the door. "Finally," Florinda said, "we've been waiting for someone like you." Elena was not sure what to say to that. She didn't need to say anything because at the top of the stairs, Nico appeared. He was wearing casual clothes today, dark trousers still, but a soft sweater, and his hair was slightly disordered in the way of a child who has been playing and forgotten to care. He looked down the stairs at Elena, and his face went through 3 expressions in rapid succession: recognition, relief, and then the uncomplicated joy of a child who has been waiting for something, and it has arrived. "Elena," he said, and came down the stairs at a speed that made Florinda take a half step forward in instinctive preparation. He stopped on the second-to-last step, which put him approximately at eye level with her, and said in Italian, "I told Papa you would come back. He didn't believe me." "I believe you told him no such thing," Elena said. Nico grinned. It was the kind of grin that rearranges a child's whole face. "Maybe not," he admitted. She laughed. The first session lasted 2 hours. They sat at the kitchen table with picture books she had brought, 3 purchased that morning from a bookstore near her apartment, 1 in Italian and 2 in English. They talked about the pictures. They talked about the difference between the Italian word for sky and the English word, the way each one sounded in the mouth, the way each one felt different. Nico was quick, sharper than she had expected, though she should have anticipated it. The children who spend a long time watching quietly are often the ones who have absorbed the most. Florinda brought them tea and apple slices and occasionally stood in the kitchen doorway with the expression of someone watching something they had been hoping to see for a long time. When the session ended, Nico took her hand with the complete confidence of a child who has decided something and led her through the ground floor of the house. He showed her the library, which had good light and walls of books. He showed her the garden through the glass doors at the back, enclosed and quiet bare in November. He showed her the dining room, the sitting room, the small room off the kitchen, where Florinda kept the household accounts and a collection of ceramic saints on the windowsill. And then he led her up the stairs to the second floor and down the hall to a door at the end of it that was closed. He stopped in front of it. "This was Mama's," he said, in Italian, very quietly. Elena looked at the door. It was a plain interior door, no different from the others in the hall. But there was something about it, the faint film of a surface that has not been touched in a long time. A door that people had been moving carefully around. "Does anyone come in here?" she asked. Nico shook his head. "Would it be all right if we looked?" she asked. He thought about it for a longer moment than most 5-year-olds would. Then he reached up and turned the handle. The room inside was a studio. It had been arranged for light, north-facing window, a skylight, the furniture positioned to get the most of both. A large table with a tilted surface for drawing, shelves with paints and pigments, and glass jars holding brushes, canvases, some blank, some painted, stacked along the wall, a wooden stool, a small bookshelf holding volumes on art history, mostly Italian, and a row of sketchbooks arranged by date. 2 years of careful nothing. 2 years of Florinda dusting around the doorframe but not entering. 2 years of a room sealed against time. Elena walked to the window and opened it. Cold November air moved into the room, and with it the weak, gray light of the afternoon. The canvases against the wall became visible portraits mostly, and landscapes, and several studies of a small boy at various ages that she recognized immediately. Gianna Conti had been good. More than good. There was precision in the work, and underneath the precision, there was genuine feeling, the kind you can't construct or approximate. She stood in the cold air from the open window with Nico beside her, and the silence in the room was a different kind of silence from the one she had walked through in the park. This one was not indifferent. This one was full. She looked at the paintings for a long moment. Then, almost without deciding to, she walked to the large work table and opened the single drawer that ran along its front. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. Her hand moved in the drawer, found a tube of paint, a palette knife, a small rubber eraser, and then found paper. An envelope, sealed, written on the front in a hand she recognized from the signed canvases on the wall, slanted precise European in its letter forms. She picked it up. The front bore 2 letters. VC, no address, no postage. It had never been sent. The paper was not old, not yellowed, not fragile, simply a letter placed in a drawer and never taken out. Elena looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Nico, who was standing at the window looking out at the garden below, absorbed in something in the way of small children, temporarily in a different world. She opened the envelope and read the letter. It was in Italian in that same precise hand, and it took her less than a minute. She read it once, then read it again, more slowly. The opening line read, "You need to know what I have found before it is too late to reach you." The rest followed in Gianna's careful hand. She had discovered something about how information was moving inside the house. She had traced it to a source close to Matteo, someone trusted, absolutely someone who had been providing detailed intelligence outward for months. She did not yet have a name she could prove. She wrote that she believed the threat came not from outside the organization, but from within its innermost circle. She wrote that she had begun to feel watched in her own home. She wrote that she was afraid of what would happen if she could not get this letter out before they understood what she knew. The letter ended mid-sentence. Elena placed it back in the envelope. She placed the envelope back in the drawer, precisely where she had found it, and closed the drawer. She stood in the cold air from the open window for several seconds, very still. She had the words memorized now, exactly as written. She called Nico back from the window and took him downstairs. She said nothing to anyone about the letter. Not to Florinda, who brought more tea and asked how the session had gone. Not to Nico, who wanted to show her a tower he had built from wooden blocks in the living room, tall enough that it had required a chair to reach the top. She praised the tower. She said goodbye. She let Enzo call her a car. In the back of the car, heading to Queens, she stared out at the city and let the words from the letter run through her mind again precisely as she had read them. She thought about the information moving outward from inside the house, about the source close to Matteo, about a sentence that had stopped without finishing. And she thought about 2 letters on the front of an envelope, and the person they were addressed to, and what it meant that Gianna had tried to reach that person and had never managed to send the letter out. She had a feeling, sitting in the back of that car in the November dark, that those 2 letters were going to matter. Or sure, she just didn't know yet how much. Back at the townhouse, Enzo Ferrara was preparing to leave for the night when his phone showed him something that changed his plans. A report from his outer perimeter team. A photograph taken with a long lens from across the street. A man with a camera stationed outside the townhouse. The timestamp showed he had been there since Tuesday morning, the day the employment contract had been distributed internally to the household staff. Enzo looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he put his phone away and went back inside. He needed to speak to Elena Mercer before she left. He caught her at the front door coat already on. "I need a minute," he said. They stood in the entrance hall. He showed her the photograph on his phone. A man across the street with a camera timestamp clear in the corner. This was taken Tuesday morning, Enzo said. The same morning your employment contract was circulated to the household staff. He put the phone away. Whoever knew about this position knew about it before we had finished the paperwork. Elena looked at the door rather than at him. She was thinking. How many people received the contract? She asked. In this house, myself, Florinda Renato, and 2 others on the administrative side. He paused. Renato handles external communications for Mr. Conti, logistics scheduling. Everything flows through him. She looked at him then. You're telling me this because you want to know if I've noticed anything? Enzo met her gaze. I'm telling you this because you notice things, he said. I've watched you in this house today. You listen to rooms, you watch people. He kept his voice level. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking you to tell me if you see something that feels wrong. She thought about the letter in the drawer, about the words she had memorized, about a source close to Matteo who had been moving information outward for months. She was not ready to give all of it yet. She needed to understand more of the shape before she moved. Not yet, she said. But I'll tell you if I do. Enzo held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded and stepped back and let her go. 3 weeks passed. They passed in the way that good things sometimes pass when you are paying attention to them, not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular fullness of time that is actually being used. Elena came to the townhouse on Monday and Tuesday and Thursday and Friday afternoons. She came at 2 o'clock and left at 5. And in between, she sat with Nico at the kitchen table or in the library or on the days when he negotiated successfully on the floor of the living room with the wooden blocks, and they talked. They talked about everything and nothing. They talked about Italian cities Nico had never visited, but his mother had described Florence, Siena, the hill towns of Umbria that Gianna had loved best. They talked about the difference between the English word for window and the Italian word and why the Italian one sounded more like what a window actually was. They talked about dogs, which Nico remained deeply interested in, and about the lives of various animals he had read about in the picture books Elena brought each week. They talked about what clouds were made of and about why the sky in November looked different from the sky in October. Nico was not a typical child in the way that some children are typical loud, uncomplicated demanding in a simple physical way. He was observant. He noticed things that adults stopped noticing years before, the way light changed on a particular wall between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, the sound the heat made when it came on, the difference in Florinda's footstep when she was hurrying versus when she was not. He cataloged these details, and he held them and occasionally produced them in conversation with the timing of a much older person. He was also, week by week, becoming something lighter. The controlled quality, that careful self-managing stillness that had struck Elena the first time she saw him, was not gone, but it was loosening at the edges. He laughed more easily. He argued about things, which was progress. He had developed a habit of meeting her at the top of the stairs when she arrived and leading her to whatever he had been working on that day, as if her arrival was the moment the day officially began. Florinda watched all of this with the expression of someone who had been waiting for a particular weather system to change for a very long time and was now standing in the sun slightly stunned. "He told me a joke yesterday," she said to Elena one afternoon in the kitchen in Italian, in a voice that carried more weight than a simple report about a joke would typically warrant. A real one, with a punchline. He remembered to wait before telling the punchline. She paused. "He has not told a joke since before Gianna passed." Elena said she was glad. She meant it entirely. Matteo was present in the townhouse the way that significant things are sometimes present, as something you were aware of even when it was not directly in front of you. He was not there every afternoon. His schedule was unpredictable and he did not explain it, and Elena did not ask. But on the days he was home, she was aware of it from the moment she arrived. Something in the atmosphere of the house changed, not oppressively, more like the change in air pressure before serious weather, not threatening, but definite. One evening, in the 3rd week, he appeared in the kitchen doorway after Nico had gone upstairs, and Elena was writing her session notes at the kitchen table. "Would you like to see something?" he asked. He led her to his library. A proper one, floor-to-ceiling shelves, the books organized with the precision of a person who uses them rather than displays them. A desk at the far end, 2 leather chairs by a window that looked out over the back garden. On the desk was a folder. "Nico's assessment," Matteo said, "from his specialist." 6 months ago. He opened it in front of her. She said he was experiencing a complex grief response compounded by linguistic isolation, that the loss of Italian in his daily life had effectively cut him off from the primary emotional language of his early childhood, and that this contributed significantly to his withdrawal. He paused. She recommended a bilingual companion rather than standard therapy, someone who could provide Italian in a natural context rather than a clinical one. I hired 4 people. None of them lasted 3 sessions before he stopped responding entirely. "Why are you showing me this?" Elena asked. "Because you should understand what you've done," he said. "Not what I've hired you to do, what you have actually done." In 3 weeks he has progressed further than he did in 8 months of professional intervention. He looked at her directly. "I don't say that to put pressure on you. I say it because you deserve to know the weight of it." She looked at the closed folder for a moment. Then she looked at him. In the lamplight of the library, without the precision of the midtown office, he looked different. Not less controlled, the discipline was always there, structural part of how he was built. But things were visible underneath it that the other contexts had kept submerged. The tiredness, for one. Not ordinary tiredness, the kind that accumulates over a long time of carrying something heavy without being able to put it down. "He told Florinda a joke yesterday," Elena said. Something moved across Matteo's face. "I know, she told me." A brief pause. "She was crying when she told me." They stood in the library for another moment. Outside the window, the back garden was dark and quiet. "You mentioned his mother was from Genoa," Elena said. "Yes, born there. She came to New York at 26. He moved to the window, stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the garden. "We met when I was there on business. She was at a gallery opening she painted. She was good. She cared about it the way serious people care about things. We had an argument about a painting on the wall within 20 minutes of meeting." He paused. "I married her 6 months later." Elena said nothing. "She was the one who made this house a home," he said. "I had the house before I met her. It was just rooms. She made it something else." He turned from the window. "When she died, I didn't know how the house still looked the same. That was the strange part. Everything looked exactly the same." He stopped, appeared to notice the degree to which he was speaking, and straightened. "Florinda will have a car ready when you're finished," he said. "Thank you, Elena, for the session today." He left her alone in the library. She stood there for a moment in the lamplight, surrounded by his books, in a house that had been made into a home by a woman who painted and who loved Italian hill towns, and who had died 2 years ago and left behind a 5-year-old boy and a husband who stood at windows looking at dark gardens. She stood there and felt the weight of the room, and the weight of the folder on the desk, and the weight of the letter in the studio drawer that she had not mentioned to anyone. VC 2 letters, a sentence that ended in the middle. On Thursday evening of the following week, a car she had never seen before pulled up in front of the townhouse. She was in the front sitting room with Nico working through a story about a sailor lost at sea. She had invented it, adding to it each session, and Nico had developed strong opinions about what should happen next. The car's arrival was visible from the window, and what caught her attention was not the car itself, but Enzo's response to it. Enzo came to the front window before the car had fully stopped. He watched it. He was already on his phone. By the time the door opened and a man stepped out, 2 other security team members were visible in the entrance hall. The man who came up the front steps was 51 years old. She would learn his age later. At first impression, she registered tall, well-built, silver-haired Irish American in the specific way that means generations of it, rather than recent memory. He moved like a man accustomed to the fact that rooms rearranged themselves around him. He wore a dark coat and a suit as good as Matteo's. He was smiling. He was shown into the sitting room. He looked at Nico first. His smile, directed at the boy, looked entirely genuine, warm, easy, the smile of a man who had known this particular child for some time. "Nico," he said, "you've gotten taller since the summer." Nico looked at the man with the guarded assessment of a child who has learned to read rooms carefully. "Hello, Mr. Crowley," he said, in English, politely. "Victor Crowley." Elena heard the name and felt nothing on her face because she was practiced at feeling nothing on her face when it mattered. She watched him. He turned to her. Here was the thing she registered in the first second and held carefully afterward. His eyes moved to her without the slight adjustment of a person being introduced to someone they haven't heard of before. There was no small recalibration, no brief processing of new information. His gaze found her with the quality of a person who has looked at a photograph and is now confirming the original. He already knew what she looked like. "You must be Elena Mercer," he said. His voice was warm and slightly rough, the voice of a man who had lived well and loudly for 5 decades. "Matteo told me about you, the woman who speaks Italian." He extended his hand. "Victor Crowley, old friend of the family." She shook his hand. His grip was firm and brief and told her nothing useful. "Nice to meet you," she said. He stayed for 40 minutes. He and Matteo sat in the front sitting room with the door open, while Elena took Nico to the kitchen and continued their story about the sailor. She kept her voice even and her attention on the boy, and she listened with the secondary hearing she had developed in 3 years of cafe work, the kind that doesn't require looking up. She could not hear the conversation in the other room. She heard tone only. Crowley's voice was expansive at ease. Matteo's was contained. There was one moment around the 20-minute mark when Matteo's voice dropped in a way that suggested something specific and not for the house to hear, and Crowley's response was easy dismissive, a sound like water flowing around a stone. When Crowley left, Matteo appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the space for a moment at Elena and Nico and the story on the table, and then looked specifically at Elena with an expression she read as assessment. "Old friend," he said, which was not quite a question. "He seemed like one," she said. Matteo held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once and withdrew. Enzo drove her home that evening. In the car, before they reached the end of the block, she said, "Victor Crowley. How long has he known Mr. Conti?" Enzo's eyes found hers in the rearview mirror. A brief contact. "Long time. Irish family. Different operations. They have arrangements." She nodded and looked out the window. She waited until she was inside her apartment with the door locked before she opened her laptop and typed in the name. Victor Crowley, New York, organized crime. What came back was thinner than the Matteo Conti results had been. Less federal attention, fewer headlines. A man who had been investigated twice and walked away clean twice, whose name appeared in connection with things in the way smoke appears near fire without ever being fire itself. He was described in one long-form piece from a financial crime journal as a consolidator, a man whose method was not violence, but acquisition, who moved into established organizations not by force, but by making himself indispensable until the organization was effectively his. She read that last part twice. She closed her laptop. She sat in the kitchen and thought about 2 letters on the front of an envelope in a drawer in a room no one had entered for 2 years. She thought about Gianna's words, someone trusted absolutely information moving outward, being watched in her own home. She thought about Renato. The following Monday, she arrived at the townhouse to find Enzo waiting for her at the front door, rather than Florinda. His expression was a version of serious she hadn't seen on him before. "Before you go up," he said, "I spoke with Renato this morning about last week's schedule change, something that was meant to be kept internal. He knew the details before I'd sent the update." He kept his voice level. "That shouldn't have been possible." Elena looked at him carefully. "He handles external communications." "Yes," Enzo said. "Everything flows through him." She held his gaze. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "about the letter in the studio drawer." She told him what she had read on the first day Nico took her into the studio. She told him precisely Gianna's words, the opening line addressed directly to VC. The description of information moving outward from inside the house, the source close to Matteo, the fear of being watched, the sentence that had stopped mid-thought. Enzo listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You've held that for 3 weeks, he said. "I needed to understand the shape of it before I moved," she said. "I understand it now." He took out his phone. "I need to show this to Mr. Conti." "Yes," she said. "But Enzo, carefully. Not until you know how much Renato already knows about what we're doing." He met her eyes. Something in them shifted the approval she had read on the first day, returning in a different form. "Understood," he said. Matteo was present in the townhouse that afternoon. His sessions with Nico had begun overlapping with Elena's on certain days, and she had grown accustomed to his presence in the library doorway to the dinners that had started extending past her contracted hours. That evening, after Nico went upstairs with Florinda, Matteo appeared in the kitchen. He carried the folder Enzo had given him. He set it on the table and sat across from her and looked at her with eyes that were very clear and very tired. She told him about the letter again directly. He listened to every word without moving. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. "She wrote it to warn VC," Elena said. "Your VC, the name on the front. She was trying to reach someone she trusted. She never got the letter out." Mateo looked at his hands on the table. "She came to me twice in her last month," he said. "She said something was wrong, that she had seen something. I told her she was ill, that the medication was affecting her, thinking that I would look into it." He stopped. "I didn't look into it." The kitchen was very quiet. "I didn't look into it," he said again, and the way he said it the second time was different, smaller, the voice of a man confronting a weight he had been carrying for 2 years without fully naming it. Elena said nothing. He looked up at her. "Enzo is watching Renato now, carefully, and without Renato knowing. We will have what we need within days." He held her gaze. "The man whose name is on that envelope, the person she was trying to reach, I need to tell you who he is." "Tell me." "VC is Victor Crowley," Mateo said. "Gianna knew him. She called him that in private because she didn't trust the letter being intercepted and the full name used against him before he could be warned." He paused. "She thought the threat was coming from below Crowley, not from him. She was trying to warn an ally." He paused again, longer. "She was wrong about that part," he said. "Crowley didn't receive her warning as an ally receiving intelligence. He received it as a man who needed to know how much she had discovered before she could get the letter out." Elena looked at him. He knew she was writing to him. Renato told him. Renato has been the link between Crowley and this house for as long as any of this has been building. He looked at the folder. Crowley wanted the Conti organization, not through confrontation, through attrition, a grieving man, a destabilized household, a trusted number 2 feeding him everything in real time. He was very still. Gianna found the thread. She started pulling it. And when Renato told Crowley what she was doing, he stopped. The silence in the kitchen was the loudest kind. "The cancer was real," Mateo said. "But it moved faster than it should have. Her doctors, 18 months after she died, flagged inconsistencies in her treatment records, a specific compound that should not have been in her system during the final months, interactions that should have been caught and weren't." He held Elena's gaze. She was being helped to die, slowly, in a way that looked like the disease doing what diseases do. Elena sat very still. From upstairs came the sound of Nico's voice, small and animated, talking to Florinda about something in Italian, his words carrying the music of a child who has rediscovered his own language and cannot stop using it. She listened to that sound and held it. "What happens now?" she asked. Mateo looked at her with eyes that were both clear and exhausted, and underneath both of those things, something that she recognized after a moment as relief. The relief of a man who has been carrying a secret in the dark for 2 years and is for the first time carrying it in the light. "Renato will be dealt with," he said. "Within days when we have everything. Crowley doesn't know yet what we know. He thinks his arrangement is intact, that I'm still blind, that you're simply a tutor who knows nothing." He paused. "I am going to be thorough, and I am going to be patient, and when I move, it will be because I have everything I need." Elena stood up. She crossed the room and stood in front of him and looked at his face, which was holding everything. It had always held the discipline, the weight, the long practice of being dangerous, and also something she had not seen in it until now. Something old that had come back after 2 years of being buried. She took his hands which were large and rough, and which had also held his son, and turned the pages of Dante in the lamplight of the library. They were cold from the draft near the window. "You should have told me earlier," she said. "I know. All of it. I know." His hands closed around hers. "I'm telling you now." The days that followed had a strange held quality. Something had changed in the house, and everyone in it knew, and no one named it directly, and the not naming of it became its own kind of weather. Mateo told her the morning after what he intended to do about Crowley. He told her over coffee in the kitchen early, before Nico was awake, in the quiet of a house that had not yet started its day. He told her the way he told her most things, directly without softening. "I'm going to be careful," he said. "I'm going to be thorough. This doesn't get resolved in a week. And it doesn't get resolved with the kind of action that calls attention to itself." He looked at her across the table. Crowley has been building something for 2 years. Dismantling it requires the same patience it took to build. I won't move until I know the full shape of what he's constructed. And in the meantime, everything looks normal. He thinks I'm still blind. We let him think that while we work." He paused. "I need you to keep coming. Keep working with Nico. Keep being exactly what you are here." "I was already doing that," she said. "I know. I'm asking you to do it knowing what you know. That's different." She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about hard things, not around them, but through them. She was agreeing to stay in a house that was the center of something dangerous. She was agreeing to be part of a plan she did not fully know. She was agreeing in some essential way to the world that Mateo lived in, not approving of it, not pretending it was something other than what it was, but accepting it as the context in which everything else she valued here existed. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said. He told her nothing extraordinary, just her presence exactly as it was. He said it without drama, without inflation, and she found that refusal to make something romantic out of necessity more trustworthy than reassurance would have been. The following 2 weeks had the outward shape of ordinary life and the inward texture of something held carefully in both hands. She taught Nico every afternoon. She painted in the studio every morning in the hours before her sessions. She had, by the 3rd week of December, filled 6 canvases studies mostly, but moving towards something larger. She could feel the larger painting waiting at the edge of the series before declaring itself. She didn't push it. She let it come at its own pace. Mateo came home most evenings by 7. They ate dinner with Nico between them, the conversation easy and warm, conducted partly in Italian for Nico's benefit and partly in English for the pleasure of moving between the 2 languages, which had its own rhythm they had arrived at naturally without designing it. After Nico went to bed, they sat in the library. He read. She read or drew in her sketchbook. They talked about things that were not the larger problem and also talked carefully and plainly about the things that were. She was learning his world the way you learn a language, not by studying it in isolation, but by living inside it, letting the grammar of it accumulate through use rather than instruction. She learned the names that mattered and the names that didn't, and which distinction meant what. She learned to read the slight differences in how Enzo moved through the house when he was carrying information versus when he was not. She learned that the phone Mateo kept in the left inside pocket of his jacket was not the phone he used for anything she was allowed to see, and she did not ask about it because she had made a private agreement with herself about the line between acceptance and complicity. She held that line, but she knew exactly where it was. Bridget called on a Friday night in the 2nd week of December. Elena was in the studio with a cup of tea going cold beside the easel looking at a half-finished canvas, and she answered on the 2nd ring. "You sound different," Bridget said. "Different how?" "Like someone who has stopped fighting a current." A pause. "Are you painting again?" "Yes." "Then something is right," Bridget said, "even if everything else is complicated." She paused again. "How complicated is everything else?" Elena looked at the half-finished canvas. At the light, she was trying to capture in the upper right corner the specific quality of winter light coming through a north-facing window, the way it carried cold and warmth, at the same time the way it made the shadow in the lower left corner not an absence but a presence. "Very," she said, "but not in the way I expected." "What way did you expect?" "I expected to feel like I was watching something from outside a window," Elena said, "like I could see all the reasons it was wrong and was choosing to ignore them." She looked at her brushes in the ceramic jar. "I don't feel like that." "What do you feel like?" She thought about it honestly. "Like someone who walked through a door she didn't know existed," she said, "and found out the room on the other side had been waiting for her." Bridget was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's either very good or very alarming." "Probably both," Elena said. "Are you safe?" "Yes," Elena said, and meant it in ways that were harder to explain than the word suggested, not just physically safe, which Enzo's meticulous operation guaranteed, but safe in the sense of being known, of being in a house that had learned to hold her presence as something expected rather than exceptional. "I'm coming for dinner next week," Bridget said. "I need to see this for myself. Florinda will make too much food." "That sounds exactly right," Bridget said. "Good night, Elena." She put the phone down and looked at the canvas for another long moment. Then she picked up her brush and went back to work on the light in the upper right corner, which was beginning to resolve into something that looked like what she had been trying to say all along. One evening, he came home very late. She was in the library when she heard his key in the door, and then the particular sound of someone who is carrying something they would prefer not to carry into the house but has no choice. He came to the library doorway and she saw his hands. The knuckles of his right hand were split. The left had bruising along the outside edge that would be dark purple by morning. He was not otherwise visibly hurt. His suit was still on, still buttoned, and somehow that made it worse, the damage to his hands against the composed precision of everything else, like a sentence in an otherwise careful letter that had gone wrong. He looked at her from the doorway. She set her book down and went to the kitchen and came back with the first aid kit that she had located in its cabinet in her second week in the house. She sat on the coffee table in front of the sofa, and he sat across from her without speaking, and she opened his hands and looked at them, and then began carefully and without dramatics to clean the damage. He watched her work. The quality of his stillness in that moment was not the stillness of control, but of something that had temporarily stopped needing to control itself. She said, "I'm not going to ask." "I know," he said. His voice was low, "but I need you to tell me this is over, whatever tonight was." He looked at her hands working on his. "It's over." She finished and applied what needed applying, and he accepted all of it without moving. When she was done, she held his hands for a moment, both of them in hers carefully. She looked up at him. "I'm not walking away from this," she said, "but I need you to understand that I'm not pretending it isn't happening either. I see it, all of it, and I'm still here." She paused. "Don't protect me from knowing what this is." He looked at her for a long time with those dark eyes, tired, and underneath the tiredness, very clear. "I know what you are," he said quietly. "I've known since the park." He turned his hands over in hers. "I'm trying to deserve it." She said nothing. She held his hands a moment longer. Then she let go and put the first aid kit away, and they did not say anything else about it because there was nothing else that needed saying. In the studio the following week, Matteo told her what Enzo had confirmed about Renato. He told her standing by the window with the December light coming in flat and cold, and he told her all of it. The intercepted communications, the financial records that Renato had kept with the meticulous caution of a man protecting himself even while betraying everyone else, the full 18 months of intelligence that had been flowing from the Conti household to Victor Crowley. He told her that Renato had known about Gianna's letter, had told Crowley about it the same day Gianna wrote it, had helped ensure the letter never reached its destination. He told her all of this, and then he was quiet for a long time, looking out at the garden. Elena stood near the work table. She looked at the canvases on the wall, Gianna's portraits of Nico at various ages, the landscapes, the careful and feeling work of a woman who had understood beauty and been undone before she could fully use it. She thought about Renato, about 18 years of proximity. 18 years of being trusted with the innermost workings of a man's life and organization. She thought about what kind of patience that required, what kind of coldness. And then she thought about Matteo across a kitchen table the morning after she had told him about the letter, with his hands flat on the surface and his jaw held carefully, and his eyes carrying the particular weight of a man who has just discovered that the floor beneath the thing he built is hollow. There was a word for what Renato had done that went beyond the operational. It was not simply betrayal of an organization. It was the betrayal of a man in grief, the deliberate exploitation of the period when Matteo was least able to see clearly, when the loss of Gianna had taken the one person who might have noticed something was wrong before it got this far. That was the part that made Elena's chest tight when she thought about it. "She was right about everything she found," Elena said. "She just ran out of time to get it out." "Yes," Matteo said. "What happens to Renato?" "That's being handled," he said. His voice carried a flatness that did not invite the question further. She did not ask further. "And Crowley." He turned from the window. "Crowley is still operating on the assumption that Renato is his. He doesn't know we've found the thread. He doesn't know about the records. He thinks this house is still compromised." He looked at her directly, "which means he's going to make a move. Soon. He's been patient for 2 years. He's been watching this household destabilize and rebuild, and now he sees..." He paused. "He sees you. He sees Nico improving. He sees something that looks like stability returning. And men like Crowley don't allow stability in organizations they're trying to acquire. She absorbed this. What kind of move? I don't know yet, but I know Crowley. He'll use the thing that creates the most disruption with the least visible fingerprint. He held her gaze. He'll use something I care about. She understood what he meant. She let the understanding sit without speaking it. I want to move you into the townhouse, he said, not as a constraint, as a precaution. Temporarily. He held her gaze. To begin with. She looked at the room around them, the studio that had been closed for 2 years and that she had gradually, over 6 weeks, brought back to life. The paintings on the walls, her own canvases stacked against the far end, the small lemon tree on the windowsill still impossibly alive. All right, she said. Temporarily. She moved in that weekend. She brought clothes and art supplies and the coffee can of brushes from her windowsill in Queens. Florinda had prepared the guest room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been expecting this for some time. Nico was thrilled in the uncomplicated way of a child for whom the presence of a good person in the house is simply an improvement that requires no further analysis. The nights were quieter at the townhouse than they were in Queens. She slept better than she had in months, which surprised her until it didn't. On a Tuesday evening in mid-December, 13 days after she had moved in, she was in the studio working on the large painting. 8:30 in the evening, the rest of the house quiet, Nico asleep. She had been at the canvas for 2 hours and was at the point where the painting begins to declare what it is rather than accepting what you intended it to be. She stepped back from it and looked. It was about the studio, about this room specifically, and about all the things a room can hold, the grief and the love and the careful preservation of both, and about the light that enters a space when windows that have been closed are finally opened. She had not planned it to be about this. She had discovered it while painting, which was how the best things happened. She heard the front door and then Matteo's step on the stair. He appeared in the studio doorway, still in his coat, and looked at her and then at the canvas behind her with an expression that moved through several things in quick succession. This is new, he said. It's been coming for a while, she said. He crossed the room and stood beside her looking at the painting. She watched him look at it. He was genuinely looking, not performing interest, not producing a polite response, but actually seeing. She would have loved it, he said. He didn't mean Elena. He meant the person whose room they were standing in, the person whose brushes were in the ceramic jars on the shelf, and whose sketchbooks were arranged by date on the small bookshelf, and whose careful and feeling work lined the walls. Elena said, I know. He turned to her, and here was the moment, the one that had been building for weeks, incremental and undeniable. He looked at her with the honest face, the one underneath the controlled one, and what was on it was not complicated. It was very simple. It was the expression of a man who has arrived at the end of his own argument with himself. I'm in love with you, he said. I've known it for some time. I've been trying to find a way to say it that doesn't complicate everything, and I've discovered there isn't one. She looked at him. She thought about all the reasons she should step back. She thought about them clearly and completely. She gave them their full weight. Then she said, I stopped counting the days I wasn't here about 3 weeks ago, because every day I was somewhere else felt like a day I was supposed to be here. He kissed her in the studio in December lamplight, and she understood in that moment the full degree to which the control was an effort and what it meant that it briefly stopped. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. This changes things, he said. I know, she said. It already has. The phone call came on a Wednesday. Not Matteo's phone, hers. She was in the studio working. 8:40 in the morning, the December light coming in flat and pale through the north window, the smell of paint in the cold air. Nico was not yet up. Matteo had left at 7. The house had the quiet of its early hours. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her palette. Unknown number, 212 area code. She put down her brush and answered. Miss Mercer. Victor Crowley's voice, warm, slightly rough, exactly as it had been in the sitting room. I hope I'm not interrupting. She said nothing. I'll take that as a no, he said. I wanted to speak with you directly this time. My last approach was perhaps too indirect. I find direct conversations are better, don't you? Less room for misinterpretation. He paused. I need you to do something for me today. I'm not going to do anything for you. she said. You might want to hear the full ask before you decide. His voice was patient. I need you to come and see me this afternoon, alone. I'll send you an address. He paused. I'd also ask you to bring the letter from the studio drawer, the original. She kept her voice level. And if I don't come, then I'll need to make other arrangements to get your attention, he said. And those arrangements will involve Nico. His school has a pickup period at 2:15. There's a gap about 10 minutes where the yard supervisor changes over. He let that land. I'm told he responds well to Italian. That should make things easier for everyone. The studio was very quiet. What time? She said. 2:00, he said. I'll send the address. Come alone, Miss Mercer. His voice was almost gentle. You're a smart woman. Come and see me. We'll talk, and then this is finished. He ended the call. She put the phone face down on the table and stood very still for a moment with her hands at her sides. She looked at the canvas on the easel, the large painting she had been working on for weeks, light in the upper right corner and deep shadow in the lower left, and the long space between them still becoming what it needed to be. She picked up the phone and called Enzo. She told him about the call in full word for word. She heard him go still on the other end. I need to tell Mr. Conti, he said. Yes, she said. Tell him. But Enzo, tell him that I'm going. Tell him I'm going regardless of what he decides. And tell him that if he goes in with force, if he makes this a confrontation before Nico is safe, someone gets hurt and it is very possibly Nico. She paused. I need him to understand that. A moment of silence. He will not be easy to convince. I know, I'm asking you to help me convince him anyway. She showered and dressed and went downstairs and ate breakfast because not eating was a decision made from fear, and she was not going to make decisions from fear today. Florinda watched her from the counter with the expression of a person who knows something has shifted without knowing what. Elena ate her breakfast and thanked Florinda for the coffee and went to the library to wait. Matteo arrived 23 minutes after she had called Enzo. She heard the car, heard the front door, heard his step on the stair faster than his usual pace, a speed that contained something she recognized from the night he had come home with damaged hands but pointed outward rather than inward. He came into the library and looked at her, and in his face was the full weight of every protective instinct that had been building since November, and the barely contained expression of a man who has just been told that the thing he most feared has been set in motion. No, he said. Sit down, she said. Elena, Matteo. She held his gaze. Sit down and listen to me. He sat, not easily. She spoke carefully. She laid it out plainly in order, with nothing omitted and nothing inflated. She told him what Crowley had said. She told him what she intended to do. She told him why. If you go in with your people before Nico is in my arms, Crowley will know, she said. He has people watching the school, watching this house, watching the route between them. He has been planning this for 2 years, and he is not careless. If he feels a perimeter closing, he will make a decision about Nico that we cannot walk back. She kept her voice steady. He called me Matteo, not you. He called me because he thinks I'm the movable piece. He thinks I'll come quietly and hand over the letter and walk away frightened. He is not afraid of me. Matteo's hands were flat on his knees. His jaw was tight. That is the advantage, she said. He is not afraid of me, which means he will let me into the room, which means I can get to Nico. She paused. And you and Enzo can close from the outside where he won't see it coming while I give you the time to do it. The library was very quiet. The letter, Matteo said. He wants the original. Yes. Do not bring it. I won't bring the original. I'll bring something that looks like it until he's close enough to examine it, and by then it won't matter. She paused. I need you to trust me. He looked at her for a long time. She understood what she was asking him. She understood that a man who had spent 20 years organizing the world around him to protect the things that mattered was being asked to stand outside a room and wait. She understood that the last time he had stood outside a room while something happened to someone he loved, the outcome had been permanent. She understood all of that, and she did not look away from it. I will have 12 people within a 2-block radius of that address the moment you send it to me, he said. Enzo will be at the door. The moment Nico is away from him, the moment you have Nico, you move toward the exit, and you do not stop moving. Yes. If anything changes inside that room, If it moves in a direction you don't control, you call out. You say anything, and Enzo comes through that door in 10 seconds. I understand. He stood up. He crossed to her and held her face in his hands, those large, careful hands, and looked at her with an expression stripped of everything he usually kept in place, just the thing underneath, just what it cost him to let her go through a door without him. Come back, he said. I'm coming back, she said, with Nico. The address Crowley sent was a building in Red Hook Industrial, on the outside, converted within, to the kind of sparse, clean space that money rents, when it doesn't want to be found where money usually is. She arrived at 5 minutes to 2. She had the letter, a copy, printed on aged paper, accurate enough to withstand a brief look in low light. She had her phone set to an open line running to Enzo the microphone live in the inner pocket of her coat. She went in through the main door, which was unlocked. The interior was one large room with high windows, the afternoon light coming in flat and gray. A table, 2 chairs, and at the far end of the room on a low cot with a blanket Nico. He was not bound. He was not harmed. He was sitting upright with the rigid, controlled stillness she remembered from the park bench in November, the stillness of a child trying very hard to be brave and managing it through sheer will. His eyes found her the moment she came through the door, and something in them shifted with the same quality it had shifted on that November morning when she had said the first Italian word to him. She did not run to him. She understood that running crossed the room too fast, and she needed to cross it slowly, and she needed to keep her eyes on Crowley, who was standing to the right of the door with his hands in his coat pockets, wearing the same expression of warm, patient ease he had worn in the sitting room 3 weeks ago. "Miss Mercer," he said, "thank you for coming." "Elena," Nico's voice small and steady, in Italian. "I knew you would come," she said in Italian without looking away from Crowley. "I told you, I always come back." She heard Nico exhale. Crowley looked between them with the expression of a man watching something he finds genuinely interesting. "Remarkable," he said quietly. "I've watched this family for 2 years. I've never seen him respond to anyone like that." He tilted his head slightly. "Matteo is lucky." He extended his hand, palm up. "The letter." She reached into her coat and produced the envelope. She held it, not yet offering it. "I want Nico to come to me first," she said. "He comes to me, he stands with me, and then we talk." Crowley looked at the envelope. He looked at her. He made a calculation. "Nico," he said. "Go ahead." Nico was off the cot and across the room before Crowley had finished saying his name. He hit Elena at hip height with the full weight of a small boy moving at speed, and she put her arm around him and felt him grip the fabric of her coat in both fists, and she kept her eyes on Crowley and her feet still. She needed 3 more minutes. She knew from the open line that Enzo had entered the building. She needed Crowley talking for 3 minutes. "Tell me something," she said. She kept her voice conversational. She was aware somewhere at the back of her mind of the studio and the unfinished canvas and the long space between light and shadow. She was still working out how to paint. She held on to that because it belonged entirely to her, and Crowley could not read it on her face. "Gianna, did you know how close she was to finishing the letter?" Crowley's expression shifted by a fraction. "That's an interesting question to open with." "I've read the original," Elena said. She held up the envelope. "You needed this because you needed to know how much she had written down, whether she had named you clearly enough to matter." Crowley was very still. "She had," Elena said. "Your full name, the compound she identified, the timeline. She was thorough." She paused. "She was better at this than anyone gave her credit for." Something moved through Crowley's face. Not quite guilt, not quite regret. Something colder than either the expression of a man confronting the full dimensions of a thing he did and finding them larger now than they had seemed at the time. "She was an extraordinary woman," he said, quietly and apparently sincerely. "She was," Elena agreed. "And her son is extraordinary too, which is why this ends today." She heard the secondary door. It opened without force, without announcement, and Enzo came through it the way Enzo did. Everything already. They're already placed, already positioned, between Crowley and the only exit that mattered. 2 more men came through the main door behind Elena. She heard them and did not turn. She kept her eyes on Crowley. He looked at Enzo. He looked at the men behind Elena. He looked at Elena. He made the calculation that a man of his intelligence and experience makes when the variables have resolved and the outcome is fixed, and the only remaining question is how to inhabit what comes next. He did not reach for anything. He did not make a sudden movement. He stood with his hands visible, his expression shifting into something almost composed, the composure of a man for whom composure is the last available resource. "The letter is a copy," he said. "Yes," Elena said. He nodded slowly. "Smart woman," he said. It had the quality now of something admitted rather than assessed. "Where is it?" he asked. "The original." "Safe," she said, "with people who know exactly what to do with it." He absorbed this. He stood in the flat gray light of the Red Hook building and let it settle over him, and then he looked at Nico pressed against Elena's side, and his expression did something complicated that she could not fully read and decided she did not need to. She picked Nico up. She carried him across the room and through the secondary door and out into the December afternoon, and she did not look back. Matteo was outside. He was standing 20 feet from the secondary entrance. She understood that he had been there for the last 3 minutes, at minimum held outside by every piece of discipline he possessed and by the knowledge that going through the door would have broken the thing Elena was holding together inside. She understood what that had cost him. He covered the 20 feet very quickly. Nico turned in her arms and saw his father and reached for him, and she transferred the boy, felt the small hands release her coat and grip his father's collar instead, and Matteo held his son against his chest with his eyes closed, both hands spread across the small back, not speaking. She stood a foot away in the cold December air and watched this. Nico pulled back far enough to look at his father's face. He examined it with the accuracy of a child who has spent his life reading that particular face. "Elena knew I was there," Nico said in Italian. "She came right away." "I know," Matteo said. "She wasn't scared." Matteo looked at Elena over the top of his son's head. "No," he said. "She wasn't." What followed happened not all at once, but in the accumulation of smaller things that taken together add up to something that cannot be undone. Victor Crowley was taken into federal custody 3 days later. The letter, the original, which had been with Matteo's attorneys since the morning of the phone call, was central to the case, along with the records that Renato had kept with the careful self-interest of a man who understood that his own documentation was his only insurance. Renato had in the end been meticulous. His meticulousness destroyed the thing he had been protecting. The process was not simple. Cases built on the kind of evidence Matteo provided rarely were. There were attorneys involved on multiple sides. There were negotiations about the precise nature of Matteo's cooperation and what it would and would not cost him. And Elena understood from the shape of his exhaustion in those weeks that the conversations happening in rooms she was not in were among the most consequential of his life. She did not ask for details he was not offering. She was present for the parts of it that came home with him each evening. The tiredness, the occasional flash of something that looked like relief when a particular hurdle cleared the way. He sat differently at the kitchen table as the weeks passed, as if a weight he had been distributing across his entire body was slowly being set down one piece at a time. She held all of that without requiring more of it than he was ready to give. She had learned in the months of living alongside him that the most important kind of presence is the kind that asks nothing of the person it accompanies. That simply being in the room reliably without a particular agenda, that was its own form of support. The kind that doesn't announce itself and doesn't need to. The investigation would take time. It always did. But the shape of it was fixed, and Crowley knew it, which meant the threat that had organized itself around the Conti household for 2 years simply stopped. The house breathed differently afterward. It was an observable fact, the kind that is available to people who live in spaces and pay attention to them. The hallway outside Gianna's studio no longer carried the quality it had held before. The kitchen became something louder and more inhabited. Florinda, who had spent 2 years cooking for a household carrying grief, began making things that required more time and more ingredients, which was her language for relief. Nico went back to school in January. His first day back, Elena stood with Matteo at the front door, and they watched Enzo's car carry the boy down the block. Matteo had his hands in his coat pockets. His shoulder was against hers. Neither of them spoke until the car turned the corner. "He'll be fine," she said. "I know," Matteo said. He paused. "I'm still going to stand here for a minute." "I know," she said. She stood there with him. The legitimacy process, which was what Matteo called it, as a description rather than an announcement, had begun before the Crowley situation resolved and continued after it with methodical patience. Real estate operations that had existed as fronts became genuine businesses properly capitalized. Logistics companies that had served as cover became logistics companies that moved goods through legal channels. The process would take years, not months, and Matteo discussed it with Elena with the same directness he used for everything else. She did not pretend it was simple. She did not pretend the past could be made retroactively clean. She held the complexity of it the way she had come to hold other difficult things, without resolving the tension, but without being undone by it either. The scholarship fund arrived one evening in the library as a complete thought already formed in Matteo's mind. "The Gianna Conti Foundation," he said. "Educational scholarships for first-generation students. Art primarily, but not exclusively." He looked at the fire. She would have wanted something that lasted. Elena said she would have wanted something that helped people who didn't believe in their own talent. He looked at her. Yes, exactly that. She designed the application materials, which surprised him and then did not. She had spent enough time with the question of what it meant to be young and talented and in need of the kind of help that money alone cannot provide. She wrote the criteria carefully. She had Bridget review them for clarity. She revised them 3 times. Bridget, who had come for dinner twice since December and had formed an alliance with Florinda based on their shared practical wisdom and shared opinion of Elena's tendency to underestimate situations, read the final draft and said it was excellent, and that Elena should stop revising it. "It's done," Bridget said. "I want to check the 3rd paragraph again." "The 3rd paragraph is fine." "Elena, let the thing be finished." She let the thing be finished. January became February. The light in the studio shifted as the days lengthened almost imperceptibly at first, and then, with a gathering speed that felt like something released after a long confinement. Elena finished the large painting, the one that had been waiting at the edge of the series since November, the one with light in the upper right corner, and the long, unresolved space between brightness and shadow. She finished it on a Thursday afternoon and stood back from it and looked at it for a long time. Nico came in while she was looking at it. He stood beside her with his hands clasped behind his back, a posture he had recently adopted for viewing artwork, as if he had decided this was the correct way to look at things that mattered. He examined the canvas with the concentrated attention of a person who takes looking seriously. "It's Mama's room," he said finally. Elena looked at the painting, the light coming through a window onto a space that held both brightness and deep shadow, neither resolved, neither dominating, both simply present. Simply true. "Yes," she said. "A little bit." Nico looked at it for another long moment. "She would have liked it," he said, "in Italian." Without grief overwhelming everything else, with grief that had become a part of things, rather than a weight sitting on top of them. He unclenched his hands from behind his back and came and stood against her side the way he did, and she put her arm around him and they looked at the painting together in the February light. The proposal happened in the studio on a Saturday afternoon at the end of February. She was cleaning brushes. This was not a romantic activity. She was at the sink along the back wall with her sleeves rolled up and a jar of solvent and 3 brushes that had been overworked and needed attention, and she was thinking about the next canvas. And she did not hear Matteo come in because she was running water. When she turned off the tap, she turned around, and he was there. He was standing in the middle of the studio floor. Behind him in the doorway, barely concealed by the doorframe, was Nico making a visible effort to be still and failing. Matteo had a small box in his hand. He looked at her with the honest face, not the controlled one, not the mask, but the thing underneath. The thing that had first appeared when he held his son in the park and that she had, over months, and through considerable difficulty, become the person he showed it to. He said, "I told you the first time we talked about what this was that I was going to be patient. I have been very patient." She set the brushes down. "Elena Mercer," he said, "you walked into this house and opened windows that had been closed for 2 years. You gave my son his voice. You gave me back a version of myself I thought was finished." He held out the box. "Marry me. Not because it's the next logical step, because I cannot imagine any other ending to this." Nico abandoned concealment entirely. He came through the door at speed, still in his weekend clothes, his hair disordered, holding the box that Matteo had apparently given him to carry, and then reconsidered mid-approach. He skidded to a stop in front of her. He held the box up with both hands and looked at her with complete seriousness. "Please say yes," he said in English. "I practiced." She looked at the box. She looked at Nico's upturned face, open and earnest, and carrying in it all the weight of everything she had seen him become over 4 months. She looked at Matteo, who was holding everything he had in this moment and was entirely aware of it. She thought about November, about a bench in a park and a child who had not spoken in 2 years and a crowd that had kept walking. She thought about the quality of certain silences and the things they contain. She thought about a letter in a drawer and a sentence that ended in the middle, and the long, careful work of understanding what it meant and what it required. She thought about the studio and the paintings and the light that enters a space when windows that have been closed for a long time are finally opened. She crouched down in front of Nico. "You practiced," she said. "3 times, he confirmed. "Florinda helped." She looked up at Matteo. "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes." Nico's face went through all 3 expressions when she had first seen on the staircase in November: recognition, relief, joy, and then he erupted in a sound that was somewhere between a cheer and a word, and Elena decided not to address the word today. Matteo put the ring on her finger. He did it with the deliberateness he brought to everything that mattered, and his hands were warm and steady, and she could feel the slight roughness of his palms, and she thought about those hands and everything they held and everything they were trying with considerable effort to become. He kissed her in the studio while Nico made joyful noise somewhere below them, and the February light came through the window at the angle she had been painting for 3 months. The exhibition opened in April. The gallery was in Chelsea, not enormous, not intimidating. 22 paintings. The series was called Light Through Locked Doors, which Bridget had said was either perfect or too obvious, and Elena had decided it was perfect. The paintings were about what they were about. They were about rooms that had been closed and what it looked and felt like when they were opened. They were about the light that enters a space after a long time without it. They were about grief and about the things that survive it, and about the beauty of spaces that hold both darkness and brightness without resolving either one into the other. Some of them were clearly Gianna's studio. Others were less literally located spaces that lived in the feeling of a threshold rather than the fact of one. The gallery was full. Bridget was there in a red dress talking to a curator with the confident efficiency of a woman who manages risk professionally and has decided to apply the same approach to social situations. Florinda was there in her good coat, standing in front of the large February painting, the one Nico had identified as Mama's room, with her arms folded across her chest and an expression that required no interpretation and received none. In the front row, in the 2 seats that Elena had not assigned, and that Matteo had occupied before anyone else could, were Matteo and Nico. Nico had dressed himself for the occasion, which meant the good jacket, the leather shoes, the hair combed into approximate order. He was looking at the painting on the back wall, with the hands clasped behind back posture he used for serious viewing. He had held it for 6 minutes without moving, which Elena noted and said nothing about. Matteo was watching her. He had been watching her since she came through the door from the back room, and he was not going to stop, and she had stopped trying to distribute her attention evenly across the room. Some things are not evenly distributed. Some things know exactly where they go. The gallerist made brief remarks. Elena stood at the front of the room and looked at the people in it, strangers and friends, and the board members of the Giannaconti Foundation who had come because she had asked them, and who were she had already been told very interested in what they saw. She said a few things. She thanked people. She talked about the series without explaining it too much, because the paintings did not need extensive explanation, and she had learned from the painters she loved best that the work speaks first, and the artist is wise to step aside. She said, "These paintings are about what happens when you stop leaving something closed because opening it is frightening. They are about the light that was always there even when the door was shut." She paused. "And about the people who help you find it." She looked at the front row. Nico, feeling her look, turned from the painting and met her eyes with his father's eyes, the deep brown that appears almost black in low light, and smiled. Not the careful managed smile of a child navigating a difficult situation, the uncomplicated full-face smile of a child who is exactly where he is supposed to be. The room held its applause, and she accepted it. and the evening moved forward in the warm, ordinary way of good openings, and Mateo was beside her within 30 seconds of the formal remarks ending, which was how long it took him to cross the room. He stood next to her, not making a scene, not requiring anything from the moment except to be in the same space she was in. She looked at the paintings on the walls around them, at what she had made over 5 months in a studio that had been closed for 2 years in a city that had not made room for her in a life that had gone nowhere near the direction she had planned. She thought about the words she had used when she was 23 and arriving in New York with a broken suitcase and a stubborn belief room. She had believed the city would eventually make room for her. It had not. The city had simply continued vast and efficient and entirely uninterested in her particular needs. But room had been made anyway, not by the city, not by any of the institutions or galleries or connections she had imagined would eventually open a door. Room had been made by a 5-year-old boy crying on a bench in November, by the sound of Italian in the cold air, by a morning walk she took because it was the one thing she could afford that cost nothing. She thought about that sometimes, about the improbable threat of it, about how much depended on a Tuesday morning and a habit of looking. "What do you think?" she asked him. He looked at the paintings with the attention he gave to things he took seriously. "I think," he said, "that you're going to need more than one studio." She laughed. It was the laugh of a person who has come through something and is standing on the other side of it, in April light with paint still on her hands from the piece she had finished that morning, with a ring on her finger she had not taken off since February, with a child nearby who was currently explaining something to Florinda with great authority, with a life that looked nothing like what she had imagined and exactly like what she had needed. She leaned against him. He put his arm around her shoulders. The gallery moved around them in the ordinary, beautiful noise of people looking at art and finding themselves in it, which is what good work is for. She thought about a Tuesday morning in November, about shoes clicking past on pavement, about 8 million people choosing all at once not to look, about a small boy on a bench who had not spoken in 2 years, about the particular kind of courage it takes in a city like that to stop. She had stopped. She had sat down beside him. She had spoken the language that connected him to something he had lost, and in doing so had begun the long, improbable, entirely necessary process of finding something she hadn't known she was missing. In the front row, Nico finally unclasped his hands from behind his back. He turned away from the painting he had been studying with such serious attention and looked at Elena and his father standing together in the middle of the room, and he smiled the way he had smiled on the staircase on the first day she came to the house. Recognition, relief, joy arriving in sequence like 3 notes of the same chord. Then he went back to looking at the painting. He had decided it was good. He intended to look at it for as long as it took to understand it completely. He was 5 years old, and he had already learned that the things worth having require the willingness to stay.